Hello. Good afternoon and a warm welcome to today's panel on the EU's approach to the Metaverse. My name is Patrick Grady. I'm a policy analyst here at the Centre for Data Innovation. For those that don't know, the Centre is a think tank that operates at the intersection between technology, data and society public policy. Well, I'm very excited by the panel we have today. Let me introduce them one at a time. We have Sarah Andrew, who's the legal director at VAS, Miranda Lutz, who's the director of public policy at the XR Association, Rohana Sringaladek, who heads the unit for interactive technologies, digital and culture. And we have joining us hopefully soon, Dragos Tudoraki, MEP for the Renew Group. So welcome everyone.
Thanks, Patrick.
So yes, I want to run through a bit of housekeeping first. I'll ask some questions that I have here for the panelists, but please, anyone is free to jump in any moment. Please feel encouraged to do so. And if when first speaking, you want to give any more context to your work, then that would also be very useful. For those viewing from home, you should see a Slido button below the video from whichever platform you're viewing from. So I encourage questions and hopefully we'll have time to answer many. Okay, well, let's get started. Oh, let's welcome Dragos. Hi, Dragos. Welcome. Good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon.
You were just in time for the first question of the day. So I wanted to start with the question we might all be asking, which is, what on earth is the Metaverse? For many of those watching and maybe even those moderating today, we might not be quite sure of the concepts. So is this just the word we now use for augmented reality and virtual reality products? Is this just a big rebrand or the latest tech buzzwords? What does Fortnite and Roblox and Minecraft have to do with all this? So Miranda, for this question, I'm hoping you're going to help me out. What are the defining features of the Metaverse? And how is it different from the internet?
No, and I think it's a great question to start off with because there's, not surprisingly, still a lot of confusion around what is the metaverse, what does it mean for technology and society at large. So I'm Miranda, I'm the Director of Public Policy at the XR Association, which is a trade association based in Washington, D.C. We have members all across the AR, VR, and MR industry, from big tech companies to small startups. So we are heavily immersed in the metaverse world. And the way that we think about the metaverse is it's an evolution of the internet. So the metaverse, despite it being in the zeitgeist, isn't actually here yet. We're probably about 5 to 10 years out from when we have a ubiquitous metaverse, but there are a few key defining characteristics that will differentiate it from the existing 2D internet. Mainly, it'll be persistent, ephemeral, and immersive. So, some people talk about the metaverse as spatial computing. I think the metaverse has, gotten hold, but it's not just that word hasn't just been around since Meta changed its name. It's from a 1994 snow crash, very famous sci-fi novel. So it's been a part of tech conversations for decades, really. And in fact, some folks that have been in the industry thought that we would have had a metaverse back in the 90s. And so it took 30 years, but we're eventually getting around to it. And so there is a difference between the metaverse and then the technologies that will be, metaverse enabling. So extended reality, which encapsulates virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. So those are the tools that you can use to access this immersive internet, but they're separate. And ideally, the metaverse would be interoperable, and there are some that hope that it's decentralized, and that's where you can get some overlap between the metaverse and Web3 and blockchain and cryptocurrencies. These are all distinct concepts. So really, the metaverse is just an evolution of the existing internet, something that is more immersive. And that can be ideally accessible from a phone using AR or a virtual reality headset. And the accessibility piece is really important because, the prices of VR headsets are not, they're not cheap these days. And ideally, the prices would come down. But we want to make sure that, everyone can access this next platform of the internet. So, but very curious how other people are thinking about the metaverse.
Yeah, thank you very much, Miranda. And it's also very useful to hear the distinction there between sort of Web3 technologies, blockchain, digital assets, and the metaverse, because they're often tangled, these two concepts. Just if I wouldn't mind asking you, because you said it will be here in 5 to 10 years, and this is obviously a challenge now. We'll reconvene in 5 years and see where we are. But could you give any sort of actual use cases of what that might look like for citizens? What will a day look like with metaverse technology in their life?
Yeah, well, we actually put out a comic book called Into the Digital World, and so it walks through this woman Kayla and how she can use AR, VR, MR throughout her life. So there's a ton of really exciting use cases, especially in the enterprise side, that are already being deployed today. So surgeons can help test out complex surgeries in MR, and to improve operating time and patient recovery. The Veterans Affairs Department in the U.S. is using virtual reality to help soldiers with PTSD. Educators can use this for students so that they can explore an archaeological dig, or walk through the Colosseum from the comfort of your own home. It's being used on the manufacturing floor to help assemble cars or planes, and real-time assist can ensure that people, someone from Hong Kong can guide someone in Missouri through a complex assembly. So it's in the enterprise space, it's already deployed pretty widely. I think for individuals, the exciting thing is how can it augment our existing relationships and our existing abilities. So for instance, if these were AR glasses, could it help me navigate to a grocery store? Or Google is testing out, I think something that'll be really exciting, the ability to do real-time translation between people. And just think of the barriers that can help break down. So I think that there's a lot of really exciting things on the horizon. Of course, we need 5G, we need we need access to broadband and internet. Devices need to be priced at an accessible price point. Governments probably need to be getting involved. So, Japan and South Korea are, and the EU as well, are on the leading edge of this and are leveraging immersive technologies for government services themselves. So I think that there's a lot of really exciting stuff happening.
Well, thank you. I think your definition and explanation puts us on a really good footing for the rest of the conversation. So I would like now to move on to the essential question of today, which is how should the EU approach the metaverse? And often when you're in discussions about internet regulation and policy, especially here in the EU, you hear this phrase, that the internet is this wild west, this kind of lawless, uncharted land. But in truth, there are many laws that we have in the EU and potential laws that might impact the metaverse. We have laws concerning privacy, advertising, AI, content moderation, competition, IP, data sharing. All of these laws may impact metaverse technology in a certain way. So my question to Dragos, and maybe we can come to Sarah, is how will existing and potential laws in the EU affect metaverse businesses and consumers? And if there are any legislative gaps, how are they best addressed?
Well, good morning, good afternoon to everyone, depending on where you are when you're watching this. I think the answer depends very much on what kind of a metaverse understanding we have as a premise for the discussion. Is it the metaverse that Miranda was mentioning at the beginning, i.e. that's sort of an avatar society where we pretty much move most of what we do right now in the physical world, from economic interaction to social interaction. We move our entire personas, we conduct businesses, we learn, we interact maybe with some sort of a governance structure. So again, is it that kind of a metaverse that is an internet plus? Or is it the, let's say, smaller, more insulated metaverses that already exist, from a flight simulator used by Boeing to, I don't know, a virtual digital avatar Bosch factory where they are testing and actually running real life simulating maintenance needs, and so on and so forth. Because if it's the first one, then we need to very seriously look at this eventuality that we know is coming. It's just a matter of when exactly will that happen, and then see exactly what kind of rules we need to be put in place, which have to be going from the very high level governance conversation and actually have a very serious conversation on that, because from my point of view, the systemic characteristics of what this metaverse could be are quite significant, and therefore, again, I would think they would need some very careful consideration plus regulation. If it's the second, there again, existing rules, most of them would already be applicable to many of the elements of such more clustered metaverses. And honestly, I couldn't say right now, I couldn't articulate right now what would be additional rules that might be necessary. But again, for the first one, the most important thing is the bigger, in a way, the more complex, the more physical-like this metaverse becomes, the more there is a question of what kind of a social contract governs the interaction and the existence of this metaverse. Because in the physical world, there is a relationship, there is a legitimacy, there is a democratic fabric behind our societies. We know what we expect, whether that expectation is met or not. By our governments, that's a different discussion. But again, there is a social contract that governs, that rules what we do and how we interact amongst each other and between us and our governance. In the metaverse, again, who would be writing, who would be the owner of such a social contract? Would it be the company or the companies that are in some sort of a decentralized fashion responsible for developing this metaverse? And if so, what would be the interaction, the rules of the game that would govern the relationship between the subjects of the metaverse, us, the users, the citizens, the avatars, doing business or learning or doing whatever, dating or going to movies or whatever we would do in the metaverse, and again, those that would be writing the rules of walking the streets in the metaverse. Who would be saying how you walk the streets in the metaverse? The second big issue is privacy. In the physical world, even putting aside the privacy rules we already have, in the physical world, there is still a space, a corner where we can go and be unseen, right? So if we don't want to interact, there is a part of our lives that still remains unseen, remains private. In the metaverse, the moment you put your goggles on, everything from your eye movement to every single interaction that you do in the metaverse is something that is traceable, visible, and therefore, I would dare say, apart from the rules that might govern the metaverse itself, there is no privacy, it's zero. So you would have to entrust entirely that whoever runs the metaverse actually respects whatever rules you would apply there to guarantee privacy. But again, you just have to work on those rules. There is no possibility, like you have in the physical world, to say, listen, thank you very much. I go and I can be seen, or I can remain unseen by those ruling over my environment. So these two things, the systemic structural one and the privacy, I would say, are the big things that in a future regulation of a metaverse that would look like the avatar of our society, physical society today, would certainly need to be on the agenda of regulators. And then there are things linked to enforcement and other elements. We can go back to them later.
Yeah, and I mean, particularly on privacy, there are concerns about new types of data harvesting, from biometric data to haptic data. And we mentioned earlier some technologies like blockchain. It's hard to see how a GDPR principle of right to be forgotten will work with the technology that necessitates keeping a record. Sarah, perhaps you would like to jump into.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick, and thanks for bringing us all together. I mean, just to explain why Avaz is in this conversation, because we are a social justice, we campaign about climate concerns. Why are we in this tech conversation? And it's partly because I think we do believe that that total metaverse is coming along, and therefore, as Dragos rather laid out, the issues that concern us in our real world environments are going to concern us in the metaverse. So very briefly, the simple answer to your question should be all EU regulation that applies offline applies online. Stalking and sexual assault are as serious a crime in the virtual world as they are in the offline world. Obviously, there are issues around evidencing, tracing perpetrators, but actually the same principles apply. So in terms of that rather kind of lovely way that Dragos has set up the conversation in terms of governance, part of the governance is, will there be commitment to, standards that apply in real life, real world, are also going to apply online. I think it's incredibly important that Europe brings its values and steps into that circle. So that decision is not made by parties outside of Europe, by parties perhaps with a profit motive. There's an incredibly interesting conversation happening on the radio just before I came, where the Metropolitan Police had asked Twitter to take down material which would be illegal in the UK because it's promoting and glorifying specific calls to murder. Facebook, I apologize, but Facebook has decided it doesn't reach its terms and conditions. These are really, really important questions around governance that we're going to have to look at. But to not dodge the question by saying it all applies, I think there are some really specific lenses. And I'm going to talk very much today about the internet that is immersive, that is haptic, that you feel is as real as the world around you, because I think certain things then derive from that. And sorry to sort of segue slightly to policy, but we need to really understand the policy challenges before we start to regulate, because we don't want to regulate for the point of it. We only want to regulate if we need to, because the other point to convey at the top is we are really excited by this technology. Can you imagine the campaigning possibilities in virtual reality, where you could have LGBTQ campaigns where to even name the fact you're LGBTQ in your homeland is illegal? You can imagine the kind of flourishing of campaigning and international campaigning that Avaz supports could be, world changing. So we have huge optimism, particularly with the idea of automatic translation, which gets us really excited. But just to kind of name those lenses, and then I'd love to pass through to Rahana on what she sees. We see main lenses, firstly around, if you like, net neutrality Mark II, an open and adaptable and interoperable protocol to allow the use of the metaverse in the same way that the internet flourished in its early days. We think that's incredibly important and doesn't currently exist. And if we don't have those conversations now, whatever is being built by the individual companies will become the de facto formula. The second lens, as Dragos has named, is the one around privacy. And I think we have to accept that the current approach, which really relies on informed consent, will be almost impossible to rely on. A lot of the data that we'll be giving to the metaverse, we won't be conscious of. Our eye movements will give away our states of emotion, our mental health status, our facial recognition. We're not even going to be aware that we're creating the data. So I think a new approach to data protection based around data minimization, localization of data. If you don't need to transfer it out of the headset, don't. And I think an understanding about perhaps on data where there isn't a conscious understanding of that data, then very strict rules about how it is used, and it can only be used for very specific named purposes. For example, it shouldn't be used as an engagement value. If you're not aware that you've given this away, then creating an engagement ranking on something you're unaware of seems very counter to our civil rights. Two more areas, and then I'll stop. The third area I think is really important is around safety, understanding how safety exists. I've mentioned stalking, but there are kind of other elements around safety. How does moderation occur, but without limiting free speech? How do you allow that glorious natural meeting of minds in the virtual world whilst creating protections? So I think that's something that nobody's talked about: common values, common areas. And I think the last thing, which maybe you could bring everything together, you could pull that governance together under, is a kind of central core around human dignity. So we've talked about open access, but we should also be talking about the rights around free expression, free movement, freedom of information. We've seen how that the concept of free information across the world through the mechanism of algorithms on social media has created polarization and disinformation. We're at the stage with VR right now that we can all agree protocols to stop this, to keep this wonderful vision of what VR can be. And I think, therefore, that although we may not be living our whole lives in the metaverse yet, we're already seeing, people are putting money into this. People are buying real estate in the virtual world, and I can't really see Meta and Google spending their hard-earned cash on things that are simply never going to happen. I really think it's coming. I think it's super exciting, but I do think we have to get governance right. And then the benefit of that will be trust from the consumers. It will be certainty for investors. There's lots of things flow from that as well. So yeah, very excited to be taking part, as you can see. Oh, I can name some legislation if you want, but maybe we should move on. But yeah, certainly GDPR, the AI Act will be really important in this. The AI Liability Act definitely has a role, particularly in this bridging moment before we determine global governance. But yeah, there's lots and lots of work to be done right now as well as in the future.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to mention, you flagged it, that the original internet was the result of policymakers, businesses, NGOs coming together and creating this protocol after like 10 years of these protocol wars. I wasn't there at the time, but I read about it. So something similar needs to happen, arguably, with the metaverse, if it is this vision that some people believe it is. But all of this excitement has really come about because the Commission have started talking about it. So maybe, Rohana, this would be a good moment to come over to you.
Hello, everyone, and good afternoon from very stormy, wet Luxembourg. So at the Commission, I'm in charge of all the R&D and policy on XR. We've been doing that for 4 or 5 years now, and I'm also the person who's working on the Metaverse initiative, which was announced in the Commission work program. Now, before legislation, just a step back. So first of all, we share the enthusiasm about the opportunities that Metaverse can bring as virtual worlds that are interconnected, open, trustworthy, inclusive, secure. So these are important aspects that have to be in these worlds right from the beginning. We learn from the internet, the way internet was developed in a chaotic manner. So we really want to make sure that the crucial aspects, all these value-based dimension, are there right from the beginning. Now, before legislation, we are also policymakers and investors, because we have some of the big funding programs, such as Horizon Europe, such as Digital Europe program. So we have been, so the Metaverse functions, as on a number of layers that come together, such as infrastructures, such as the enabling technologies. XR, we mentioned that. The core technologies such as XR, the enabling technologies such as security, blockchain. You have the content aspect, which is super important, that comes there, which is really fundamental, content and creativity. So we're not starting from scratch. We've been investing in these building blocks for the past years, and significantly over these 2 years. We have more or less approximately an investment around 800 million, $1 billion in these building blocks of metaverses. So we're really excited, that we have a good starting point for the initiative. Now, in relation to the legislation, Patrick, I think we have a good starting point with the legislation, which is just kicked in, like the DSA and the DMA, which are a good, which could give a good framework to start with in relation to the obligations for online platforms and very large online platforms to moderate potentially illegal content, to be more transparent about their content moderation practices. In relation to the very large online platform, you have some additional obligations, which is also about the systemic risks for protecting public interest and fundamental rights that Sarah mentioned. So these are important, and we know that they are early movers. They're already there in the metaverse. So this is an important framework under which they are going to be operating. We mentioned GDPR. An important aspect is that it's the more we will be engaging in metaverses, the more we will have consumers being in the metaverses, the more awareness and deeper insights we will have about the gaps there are or not. Because right now, in each panel, I hear one thing and the other. Some people tell me, I know GDPR is sufficient, and others say it's absolutely not sufficient for the kind of new data we're going to be speaking of, and I think, Sarah, you mentioned those. So what we see right now, starting position, is that GDPR has already prepared the ground for consumers to enter into metaverse, and that is already a huge thing. So consumers have this minimum safety net when it comes to their data, and right now, to my knowledge, any business that is located anywhere in the world falls under its term if the business offers goods, offers services in the EU, and if it monitors the behavior of the EU citizens. Even if it has no physical presence, it comes under GDPR. So we have some good basis. So DSA, DMA, GDPR. Now, obviously, you tell me the devil is in the details, and the more we get into it, the more deeper insights, the more we will know where we are in terms of really having a whole framework which is absolutely fit for purpose. And there is also the AI Act and the Data Act, which is also the responsibility of my directorate, which will also allow SMEs to benefit from the data which is there. And the last thing I just want to mention is that I think it's Miranda who mentioned it, or Sarah, I'm sorry about that. It's the what cannot be done offline cannot be done online, and we're going to have the digital principles, which is going to be a proclamation between the three institutions, the Parliament, the Council, and the Commission, which is going to reaffirm, what is not accepted offline is not accepted online. I think that is an important statement to make, to give some of the basic understanding of what kind of behavior is expected or not in the metaverse. So these are a bit, our initial starting position in relation to supporting and fostering the wider use of metaverse in industrial and societal areas.
I don't know if anyone had an immediate reaction to that. Just one comment I'll make before. Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned the digital policy program in the EU, because one thing that's sometimes missing from these conversations is all of these really exciting use cases can only come about if the infrastructure is in place. So I think in the policy program, they're quite specific, and they say, look, we need everybody on over 1 gigabyte a second speed. We need latency to be lower, broadband width to be broader, and reliability to be better. So this is actually a really fundamental part of this conversation there too. If nobody had a reaction to that, I'll move on to the next question. It's quite related. I wanted to shift onto something a bit more practical and positive. So yes, we all know the kind of issues that can arise with 2D content. We've spoken about it with text, with GIFs, images, videos in this 2D space, and we're aware of sort of the privacy, accessibility, content quality, policy issues. Maybe I'll go back to Dragos and ask, you mentioned privacy earlier. Do you think this is the priority area? And my second question is, how do you see emerging technologies? I know you're quite familiar with the AI Act, clashing with the metaverse.
Well, I think privacy stands out simply because of the magnitude of impact, in a way. And again, how different metaverse would be from the real life, and how, as I explained earlier, in a metaverse, there would be no privacy. There is no privacy. The moment you enter, whether via Google's or via any other sort of interface, From that moment, you are traceable, you are visible, everything you do transforms into data that is being processed somewhere. So it is quite a fundamental shift from the reality and the way we live right now in a physical world, which is why, again, only through rules, no matter how strict you would have rules that would also apply in the metaverse, whether GDPR or even more complex, there comes the question of enforcement. And for me, that's the second very big thing. And I agree with what was said earlier. Yes, everything that is illegal offline would also need to be illegal online or basically in the metaverse. But the question is, who are the police officers? Who are the regulators in the metaverse? Right now, again, speaking of a social contract, if someone breaks the rules, if someone drives too fast on the motorway in real life, you'll have a police officer that would apply a fine. What if I drive like a nutcase on a virtual highway in the metaverse? Who's going to punish me and how? And who gives legitimacy to that someone, to that virtual police officer, to stop me and apply to me a virtual, or maybe even actually not virtual, because again, we'll be also connected with our economic identities in this future metaverse, and therefore we may actually pay real fines. But again, what is the legitimacy of those rule makers and enforcers in the metaverse, and how, in fact, the whole enforcement environment would look like in such metaverse? So again, from my point of view, I insist on this issue of having a very early, and unlike everything else that we've done with digital, where we've allowed for a number of years for the digital to evolve, to be pioneers, to be basically be cowboys, Wild West. And then we started coming with digital rules. And even when we started coming with digital rules, everyone, oh my God, no, you are hindering innovation. And oh my God, you stifling businesses. And that certainly we should not do. We have to recognize that this is now our new economic reality. We are in a data-driven economy. This is the new industrial revolution. So we have to embrace it and indeed allow for our economies to grow based on digital. But I think we have a duty of care to think of rules. And when it comes to the metaverse, I think, again, unlike everything else that we've done so far, we have to think ahead of the actual development of the metaverse because of all of these potential tremendous impacts on our way of life that would be relevant in the metaverse. And therefore, I think, again, this time around, we need to have these conversations earlier, right now, when the metaverse is still, this metaverse, the big one, is still now kind of being at an incipient stage. We have to figure out the rules quickly. We have to have an agreement in society. Again, what is the value base? That's a very important conversation. What are the values in the metaverse? Is diversity a value in the metaverse? Should it be a value in the metaverse? Because we look at diversity very differently across continents, right? So again, whose values are more relevant in the metaverse? European, American, Asian, South Pacific, whatever. So again, conversations that we need to have. It's not. I've done a test, and I did it on purpose. I've put an amendment on metaverse in the Act, and I didn't do it because I was actually thinking that there will be a hoorah of support from the other political groups. I knew that this would not happen, but I did it because I sent a test balloon with that amendment, where I said basically exactly what Sarah was saying earlier. These rules would apply mutatis mutandis to a metaverse that would look pretty much like this. And again, I did it on purpose. I did it because I wanted to ring an alarm bell and say, folks, we have to start thinking about the rules of the metaverse of tomorrow. We have to think of how, again, mutatis mutandis rules that we are discussing here, for example, in the Act, would also be applicable in a metaverse that, again, would fit within certain conditions and criteria. And I am happy to see that now there's going to be some sort of a metaverse regulation coming. And I think, again, we need to, it's good that we're doing it, but we need the global conversation on this.
Well, the bell is well rung, so thank you for that. And I take your point about, what does diversity look like, especially if we imagine avatars where you can choose what you look like, for example. I want to move on to the audience questions. I don't want to commit the moderator's sin of never leaving time for this. And we have plenty. So, I mean, congratulations to somebody that submitted a question before the event started. The question number one, and I'll send this to Miranda. Do individual EU citizens sufficiently understand Metaverse? And was there adequate information other than bits and pieces on social media platforms and outlets?
Yeah, well, speaking as someone from Washington, D.C., I'm going to expand the question to all citizens. I'm sure my colleagues are probably better placed to speak to the EU angle. But no, I mean, I think that there needs to be a multi-stakeholder education campaign about what is the metaverse and how individuals can control their data and their experience. And we have a colleague from the XR Safety Initiative, XRSI, that talks about this concept of onboarding. And I think that it's a really interesting theory of, you know, what can we do from an educational perspective, a digital literacy perspective, to make sure that, you know, kids are learning about, you know, good hygiene practices online. How can they keep themselves safe? What does it mean to be wearing a virtual headset? What kind of data is being collected and for what purpose? And how can you control that? And what does that impact, you know, how does that impact your experience? So I think that there needs to be there's a big gap, I would say, in education. And I think it is, you know, just part of the zeitgeist, and metaverse has become a buzzword. And so we talk about, you know, Roblox and Minecraft as potential metaverses, but they're not really, in the sense that, you know, what we would envision a metaverse, you know, 10 years from now. So I think that there's a big role to play for industry, for academia, for civil society to come together. And I think that's why these conversations are so important, and they're being had early, that we're, you know, flagging the issues of concern. I think the way that Sarah kind of broke it down into, you know, interoperable, privacy, safety, and human dignity. Those are the big key concepts. And so it's, you know, and I am cautiously optimistic that we are headed in the right direction. You know, many governments such as the EU, the World Economic Forum are starting to bring together these multi-stakeholder initiatives to look at metaverse governance and try to ask these hard questions. I mean, it's not easy to figure out who's, you know, responsible or accountable for actions. Should avatars have legal personhood and be held to the same standards as, you know, me, a physical person? So, and you know, how does content moderation work in a world that's constantly evolving and where user-generated content is the majority of worlds? Is there, you know, how do we keep kids safe online? That's something that industry is focused very acutely on, especially given the immersive and haptic impacts of this. So sorry, I think I expanded the question and opened up a few other cans of worms, but I'll leave it there.
No, that's really useful. And also, you know, you said Roblox and Fortnites of the world aren't real metaverses. I think they might be better seen as sort of proto-metaverses. They share a lot of the characteristics, and, you know, even something like Pokemon Go will have some characteristics of metaverse. So they all sort of have certain features that maybe one day everything will come together.
Absolutely.
So maybe Rahana, you could help me with this one. I'm not quite sure I fully understand it, but maybe you will. Is the concept of VR, AR-based technology a sustainable and resilient idea in the 21st century? I.e., with climate crisis, geopolitics, cybercrime, I think it's saying is maybe this a priority. Maybe you could also, as part of your work, give some vision of the kind of use cases and why it should be an important idea.
Patrick, I'd like to reply to the first question about this EU citizen, and then I'll touch upon that one because it's a very important one. So as part of this, you know, all the multi-stakeholder engagement we're going to start, you know, in view of this non-legislative initiative, I have to insist on that. It's not about regulation. It's going to be about setting a vision and the kind of activities and actions that can foster a value-based metaverse or metaverse applications. So the citizen dimension is really going to be central in it in different ways. So first of all, it's about indeed testing, better understanding what is the awareness, what are the concerns of the citizens. So really understanding what is that matters to them, how can we make that for them easier to understand, but also to use metaverse applications. And on the second hand, we are going to do the what we call citizen panels within the Conference of Europe initiative. So the idea is really to bring a big number of citizens and to engage them in what we call informed deliberations. So really to seek their views on a number of questions so that they can form policy recommendations that can then feed in our initiative. So it's a two-way process to make sure that we are listening to citizens, and by that they are feeding back into the policy making. And we're also going to do different kind of activities with young people. So our counterparts in the US, you may or may not be aware of the Safer Internet activities, which is it's a really very wide initiative which addresses the protection as well as the empowerment of young people, so that they feel safe and confident to engage on the internet. And we're also going to engage a lot through the Safe Internet initiative to see what young people think. What is their expectation of metaverse, what it means. I was quite surprised, when I was speaking to my daughter, who's a teen, about Meta's metaverse, and he said, "But Mom, nobody's interested in that." It's a 16-year-old saying this. So then obviously the question is, but then what are you interested in? Tell us. So we will also engage through Code Week, which is also about the large-scale coding actions, where we also bring in the metaverse. So a lot of different parallel strands to seek citizens' feedback into what are the important aspects. That's one thing. And also, as we will be going forward, what we also want to look is from the innovation point of view, what kind of tools we can develop and we can make them available so that citizens can engage without having to think, about, blockchain, all those kind of things. So easy, user-friendly tools for them that allows them to protect be it their digital assets or their privacy. So there will be different strands of work for us to really make sure that people are at the center, and citizens that really know, we can help citizens to engage in the metaverse. And then what was your second question, Patrick? You wanted me to come in?
The second question was about the very idea of it. Is it a resilient and sustainable idea in the context of, I think I read it as, bigger problems?
I think it is. Obviously, it is. It is. We are, in the eye of the storm. How can we not have that important reflection embedded in the way we want these metaverse applications to be? Because at the same time, of course, they require a lot of energy, but at the same time, they can also be a solution to saving energy. So this thinking about sustainability has to be embedded in the development of applications that we will be supporting in any case.
Okay, thank you very much. And also to your point about citizen involvement, for those interested, the Behavioural Insights team, UK-based think tank, are doing work with Meta. They're piloting citizen assemblies to try and work out the rules of the digital space. So that's kind of interesting work to follow for those interested. So this question is directed at Sarah. Would you mind sharing some other privacy best practices? So I think earlier you mentioned device localization. Did you have any others?
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. And I think just to take the liberty of also building a little bit on what's just been said, I think it is quite important that with all of this sea of sort of questions about governance and where do we start, I mean, we do already have building blocks. We have, the EU's commitment to the International Charter on Human Rights, or the EU Charter on Fundamental Rights. We do have the UN Business Principles. And I think that we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have found fundamental principles that we can start to build this world through. And in fact, those should be seen as the sort of litmus test, if you like, of stakeholders' genuineness in participation. Is, are they actually going to kind of try and rewrite the rules and ignore some of these? Or are they going to, you know, believe in freedom from discrimination, freedom of expression? I think that's really important. I think then coming back into the EU, we also have some building blocks. We have the DSA's approach, where you assess the risks of a particular system, any online platform. So this could be a metaverse platform. It's debatable at the moment whether any of them are big enough to be touched by the DSA, but the concept of you're offering something to the world, you need to assess the risks of that something, the algorithms that run it, against fundamental human rights principles, against negative societal effects. And the AI Act also has really interesting ideas that we can build on. At Avaz, we're particularly interested in building a more granular assessment framework about whether something should or should not fall into a high risk activity. And it's arguable that metaverses perhaps might be seen as high risk if they have a particular impact on, say, privacy and data collection. So I'd like us to all remember that although this is a new world, some of the solutions we found are not irrelevant. And I think actually it could be a great, wonderful trick that might be played on us by those promoting the wonderful metaverse. Say, well, this is entirely new. We have no idea how to do it. So why don't we let Meta with some focus groups decide what are going to be the rules? Well, I really like the UN Fundamental Charter on Human Rights, and that was fought over. So I'd rather rely on rights than maybe values created by private companies. That might just be me. Turning to the specifics then, I think that there are some things that in terms of privacy practices would be useful. I think GDPR, I love Rahana's description of GDPR preparing the way. I think that's actually a really, really good description of it. So there are ways that could build on that. So for example, I mentioned localizing of data, which means that your eye movements need to be tracked in order for you to not bump into walls and understand where you are in the virtual world. But actually, theoretically, there's no reason why that data needs to be transferred to a central holding location over in Silicon Valley. It could be localized within your equipment. That's what we would call a data minimization principle, and those principles exist, but need to be employed in the environment of VR. There are other principles as well I think are really important. Apologies for me to go to my notes to make sure I don't miss them. But yes, I think the notion of consent needs its own kind of Web 0.3 kind of adaptation. And I think particularly we need to understand that a sweep all consent at the beginning in order to get the benefit of engaging in something is not consent if you don't understand what you're consenting to. And this brings about the idea that we're going to have some way of dealing with unconscious data production. So this is your eye movements, your facial, all the things that are part of it being immersive, as opposed to just seeing in front of the screen. So I think that's the second really important thing, is to build on graduated explicit principles. And one of the ones I'm suggesting, partly because it's created so much difficulty in the kind of social media algorithm space, is that engagement metrics need to be really consciously and carefully designed. And having engagement metrics based on unconscious responses seems to me inviting the kind of polarization and risks of disinformation that we've seen flourish over in social media space. So I think that's another area. And then I think there's a third one I'd like to mention, which would be a new concept, which would be really looking at where or if there is any harm to the data proposed. And I think that the very specific flip side to that would be, what protection do we need to give to altruistic data use? So I'm thinking here about academic data use, NGO data use, where we are tracking what's being done with this data. How is your privacy being infringed? And there are at least 2 examples recently of Meta shutting down academic access to data which the data subject has specifically consented to. So the data subject said, yes, I'm really happy for you to scrape my data from Facebook to inform you what Facebook is doing with my data, and Facebook have used their own terms and conditions, sorry, Meta, I should now say, to stop that. So I think there needs to be, in this world where we're not sure where governance lies, a protection for altruistic data use. And I think that's probably where I'll leave it, because I'd love to talk about GDPR all day. I'm actually an ex-regulator, so it's my home territory. But I think those are probably enough ideas to go on for there to be some time for the rest of the question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah. Please, if anyone wanted to jump in, do so. Otherwise, yeah, please.
I just wanted to follow up because I completely agree. I think one other best practice is to give users control over your data. So, functions like eye tracking can help image rendering so that you don't get motion sickness, as you're moving. But they can use, gyroscopes and magnetoscopes and all this other technology as well to help with that. So giving users control over whether or not that eye tracking function is on or off. And then just understanding how that might degrade or improve your experience, I think is also important. And I think that there is going to be a combination of policy and regulatory solutions for these privacy issues, and then also technological advancements as well. Ideally, all the data would be processed on devices, but then that could potentially impact form factors. So devices might be heavier or a little bit clunky. And so I think that is the goal and the aim, and we just need to work towards the technological advancements and innovation that will support that policy objective. But just to say, not 100% there, but I think we're on the right path, and the fact that we are talking about these best practices right now is important.
There needs to be new sort of vision of data sharing, because if we want the goal of interoperability, for example, in an open, accessible metaverse, it's not kind of easy if you localize the data. But I want to move on because we have so many Slido questions, which I think is a great indicator of the excitement here. So, Dragos, this one's definitely for you. Can policymakers stimulate and incentivize positive innovation in the metaverse? And then I think the idea of positive innovation here is, designing for child rights and well-being as an example.
Well, I think the question is pretty much the same as, can we also stimulate and talk up the impact of AI, for example, which right now is, let's say, the more immediate eventuality and reality than the one of Metaverse. And what I always say when we get to talk about this is trustworthiness. So for me as a politician, to talk up Metaverse and to encourage innovation and uptake and all the good things that the Metaverse would be doing to all societies, I need to trust it. Otherwise, I won't be advocating for it, that's for sure. And as regulators, as legislators, as politicians, we have a duty to look at the health of our societies, to look at the health of our democracies. Again, I need to be convinced that what's happening there is healthy. There are many risks. We've discussed already about governance, privacy, enforcement, what's offline, what's illegal here, it's illegal there. But there are other things that are more human, that are more individual, that are more specific to what we are and how we function as human beings. Again, what will it bring the good in us or the bad in us? Will it be some sort of an alternative space where we might feel that we can do things that go past the social norms that right now make us abstain from doing certain things simply because we are educated that they are socially unacceptable? But will I feel encouraged to do them in the metaverse because it's lawlessness out there, or because it's possible that I can be a different persona than I am here? Again, in a good sense, but others might also feel that they can be, in a bad way, a different persona up there. It can also be a way of running away from the world, which, particularly if we look at the younger generations, is something that we need to be very mindful of as well. So will the metaverse be a place where we can stick our heads in the sand and ignore the reality of the physical world, and maybe engage in things that here in the physical world would not? So again, for us as politicians to really pick up let's say, start signaling an interest or encourage development in Metaverse, we would need to have all of these conversations squared off. We need to have answers to all of these concerns, and we need to understand how the evolution of all this possible metaverse, because again, we're discussing about an eventuality. We don't know whether this thing is going to, as I think Rihanna was saying about her teenager. I also have a teenager ask the same question: is metaverse something that you kids talk about? And funnily enough, they're not. So I don't know whether some companies, I won't say the name, some companies' bet is a good bet or a bad bet. You were mentioning that maybe because they are spending all that money, it must be a good bet. I don't know whether it's a good bet or not. But to the point where we as politicians will start writing encouragement slogans about the metaverse, there's a long way.
Yeah, and I mean, we spoke earlier about Roblox. I heard a statistic that I think over 75% of 9 to 12-year-olds are playing Roblox, right? So at the moment, they might not be thinking about the metaverse, but they will be the metaverse generation. So if it's here in 10 years...
Yeah, but that, sorry to come back in, but there, for me, I think Miranda was saying it, that's not the metaverse that we are discussing right now. For me, an immersive game, an immersive controlled environment, whether it's the Roblox or I've learned about it today, by the way. I have no idea what that is, but I can pretty much imagine what it is. But I don't play computer games and so on and so forth. So anyway, but I can imagine what it is. But that is not, again, there. It's simpler in a controlled environment like this, in a controlled metaverse of this nature, whether it's a game or whether it's a virtual factory or whatever. It's a different thing. It's simpler to apply rules there. It's simpler to define the rules of engagement in such an environment. It's that sort of a much broader society-like metaverse that I think is the subject of our conversation here, and where we need to do all of the things that we are all saying that we need to do here.
Yeah, point taken for sure on Roblox. We're running out of time, which yeah, I think is a good sign when you're concerned about that. So I want to have one more question, and maybe just get like flash thoughts from Miranda and Hannah. So there have been concerns about the metaverse becoming walled gardens, sort of company to company. Do you foresee the emergence of distinct metaverses in separate jurisdictions? Yeah, that's the question.
I think that's a very hard question to answer in full 4 minutes. I'll say that there's ongoing work to look at interoperability that brings in stakeholders from around the world. So the Metaverse Standards Forum has over 2,000 organizations, that's private companies as well as civil society, individual academics and researchers that are looking at these issues for how to make the metaverse interoperable. And then there's also the jurisdictional angle. So we need government-to-government communication. So I think forums like the EU-US Trade and Technology Council, from the US perspective, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, other types of forums where we can work out the jurisdictional interoperability will be important as well. So I think that the vision, if we want it to be a truly human first vision of a metaverse, I think it is interoperable. And that means that we have to have a different approach to walled gardens. That said, there's, we're at the very, very beginning stages of that road. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah, if I can also chip in, the same line of thinking. For us, what is important is really that the metaverse is interoperable and open. But there's a lot of work at different levels in terms of standardization. So you have the technical standardization, and then also, as Miranda said, at government level. So in relation to technical standardization, we're engaging with all the standardization bodies, on where do we start? Because it's a lot of work about? Are you speaking about, how do you port, how do you transfer your avatar or your identity? And it's really quite a few stuff. And in relation to government, we're having a lot of conversations. It's not yet part of the TTC. It's not the one which is coming. But Miranda, I'm sure it's going to come sooner or later. Yeah, it's very much on the table now.
Well, thank you very much for managing to do that so quickly. Yeah, for both of those. Yeah, please feel free.
30 seconds left. I'd just love to make one little point building on what Dragos said, which is about who we want to be in the metaverse. Do we want to be the people we are now, have the values we have now? And I just want to kind of throw in the idea that the technology is not neutral, though. We have a lot of evidence that people entering onto social media were not bad people. They were not kind of polarized when they entered in. And the operation and the way the technology worked, particularly the algorithms around engagement, polarized people and made them take positions that they wouldn't have done when they entered into the universe. I'm a really big believer in humanity. I think if we can find a kind of governance and operation system that allows us to be who we actually are, as opposed to pushing us into boxes, I think that would be a massive service for the metaverse. That was all I wanted to say.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah. We won't have time to talk about it, but obviously with all of this interoperability, it's a great time to be an antitrust lawyer, I imagine. This conversation could go on for hours. Thank you very much for joining me. I look forward to continuing this. And thank you very much to everybody at home.
Thank you.